Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are moving along once again with our early off-season preview series, asking a couple of questions of each of the squads in the NBA here in the, early stages of the off-season, hence the name of the series. So we are going to be focusing in today on the Brooklyn Nets, a team that obviously underwent some pretty seismic changes about halfway through the season. They pull the plug on the Kevin Durant experiment and send him out west, which means effectively that the entirety of their roster changed overnight, or at least the hierarchy of how their roster was supposed to work. So we are obviously going to talk a little bit about what that means for the Nets moving forward, but first and foremost, let's get some stats up on the screen. You can see for Brooklyn, their record in the regular season, 45-37. That was good enough to be the 6th seed in the East, just 4th, though, in the Atlantic Division. So the Atlantic was really doing pretty damn well here. 4 teams in the playoffs. The Raptors even were in the play-in, even though they didn't actually make it all the way through. So technically speaking, all 5 teams in the Atlantic Division saw postseason action. So not bad for the division. Unfortunately, that postseason action for the Nets themselves was not great. They went 0-4 in the playoffs, eliminated in round 1 as they were swept by the 76ers, which was unfortunate, but maybe not surprising at that point. But with that in mind, their season came to an end. We can take a look at some of their stats across the regular season in terms of offensive rating, 17th in the league, just a bit below the average. Defensive rating, they were 13th. So not so bad there. That puts their net rating dead center in the middle at 15th, while playing with the 21st highest pace and having the 9th highest payroll in the league. Of course, with Kevin Durant now traded, that payroll obviously fluctuated, but for the majority of the regular season, they were sitting in 9th. So, with that in mind, we will take a look at some of the additions and losses to this roster for the Nets. In terms of what's been added to the lineup as of right now, it's a trio of draft picks. Noah Clowney, Derek Whitehead, and Jalen Wilson were all added to the roster. In terms of losses, no one has moved just yet, I believe. Made that mistake earlier on with the Kings video where I didn't check. So if I double check and find something in editing again, it will go here. But as of right now, nobody off the roster. They do have a couple of situations with free agents and players who have team options, but as far as I'm aware, there has been no decision made on any of those players as of yet. So draft picks in, nobody out at the moment, and that means we can get straight into some of our biggest questions here for the Nets this offseason. Question number 1, is Ben Simmons actually going to play? I mean, yeah, you kind of saw this coming, presumably. Ben Simmons is set to make $37.8 million this season and has 1 year left on his contract beyond that. He is by far the largest salary on the Nets. I think he's like 15 million over the next guy by sort of annual value. And he also represents the single largest total money commitment to the roster overall, because he still has a couple of years left. If Ben Simmons were producing closer to what we saw in Philadelphia, which over the course of his time with the 76ers, he averaged about 15.9 points, 8 rebounds, 7.7 assists, and 1.7 steals. If he were producing at or around those numbers, then there would likely be far fewer concerns. Maybe you'd still want that scoring to be bumped up just a little bit, but you would be slightly happier, right? The problem is, Ben Simmons has played just 42 games for the Nets since he joined the team. So that is, I believe, now 2 full seasons. He has played 42 games in total. And his stats have obviously fluctuated massively because he's not playing in too many games. So it becomes a rough situation here. Personally, I have not given up on Ben Simmons being able to contribute to a successful team, to being a significant part of a good contending team in the NBA. I have, however, sort of given up on him being the guy, right? The number one option, the superstar player who could lead a team all by himself, and sort of truly living up to the price tag of his contract. I think at this point that ship may have sailed. Between his injuries and his issues off the court, whether you believe some of the reasons he was giving or not, the fact of the matter is that Ben Simmons has simply not been available for the Nets. And as the old adage goes, right, the best ability is availability. If you literally can't suit up and play for your team, you don't really have too many ways to help them. But going back to the point that I previously made, where I still think he can be a significant piece to a good team, it is hard to imagine any scenario in which the Nets are genuinely better with Ben Simmons in street clothes, right? If he can play in any capacity, you would think that he would be able to help this team. So I still think that's a big question, right? Can he be the absolute number one superstar guy to the level of some of the star players that he was being compared to when he was drafted? I don't think so anymore. But can he be the second or third option on a Nets team that is still looking to maybe build something and compete? Absolutely, so long as he is healthy enough to play. So that's something the Nets do need to sort of look at. But if Ben Simmons isn't the number one option, then who is? And that leads me into question number 2, which is, can or should the team build around Mikal Bridges? Right, so the Nets had a 13-19 record overall after they acquired Bridges around that trade deadline, which at first you would think, okay, that trade didn't really work out massively for them immediately. But I would still say that a decent portion of that losing record could be chalked up to the fact that the Nets um, basically needed to adjust to a trade that changed the entire face of their franchise, the entire way that their roster worked overnight, right? And that's not going to happen. It was a sizable and abrupt change to their roster, and you can't expect everyone on that team, especially some of the Nets guys who are younger and less experienced, to immediately bounce back from a scenario where you were playing around Kevin Durant to not playing around Kevin Durant, right? Mikhail Bridges is obviously a very good player that they got in exchange, but nobody is quite the same as Kevin Durant. So, yeah, the Nets did sort of have a losing record once they picked up Bridges, but it was a small time frame and they needed to adjust. But even with that being said, you look at Bridges' numbers in the time he played for them. He played 27 games in the regular season for the Nets, averaged 26.1 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2.7 assists on 53% shooting from the field, 38% from 3, and 89 from the free throw line. So he was looking pretty good. He put up similar numbers in that series sweep that they suffered against the 76ers. So that is still a pretty small sample size, right? That's 31 games in total from Bridges as the number one option for this team. But it looked pretty good. The question that I would have is whether that offensive production is something that can be maintained or potentially even improved over the course of an entire season. If he's not playing 25 to 30 games for you, but potentially getting 70 plus if he stays healthy for a whole season. And then a question to add on top of that question is, can he maintain that offensive output while still being the elite level defender that he was in Phoenix, right? It is a genuine question at this point. With the Suns, he was able to focus a lot of effort on the defensive end of the floor because he was not the first option on offense. So he could still score. Let's not take anything away from him on the offensive side. But when you had other guys, right? When you had, Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, those sorts of guys who would have the ball in their hands a lot more often, you could sort of get your baskets as they came to you, but focus a lot of your effort on the defensive end. If Bridges is the number one option, if he is sort of running the offense for the Nets, will he still be able to put that same level of effort in on defense if he has to score all these points for the team as well? So it is a question, but if you're the Nets, there is very little risk in finding out, right? Bridges is signed for multiple years on a pretty manageable salary as well. He is not breaking the bank by any means, especially if we consider the fact that they're still paying Ben Simmons all that money, as we mentioned before. So I think the best thing for the Nets to do in terms of this decision, whether they build around Bridges, is to simply not make the decision yet, which is a cop-out, yeah, but, hear me out here. Play out one season with Mikal Bridges as the focal point of your offense. See what the results look like from a full season with Bridges as your number one option. And then you can make the choice next year. Is he the guy? Is he the one that we truly feel comfortable building around? You will have a full season's worth of statistics to look at from him. You'll get a better idea of how he fits with some of the other players in the Nets lineup, especially some of those younger guys. And potentially, you'll even get the chance to see how he stacks up on a team alongside Ben Simmons if Simmons is healthy and does play. So I think that there's no harm there. Lay out one more season, then you can make a decision about the long-term future for Mikal Bridges. In the meantime, you don't have too much to lose, right? So we'll see if that's the direction the Nets want to take that. But in the meantime, let's get into question number 3. We're going to go from the offensive end to the defensive here. Point 3 here is not really a question, but they need to get better inside, and they need to get Nick Claxton some help. Now, Claxton was unbelievably good for them. He averaged 9.2 rebounds per game over 76 regular season games. So he played basically the entire campaign. Once they reached the playoffs, those numbers did dip slightly. His average went down to 8 in the playoffs, but that's still pretty damn good. But here's where we get to the rough part, because Claxton was great in terms of rebounding. Everyone else kind of sucked. Of the Nets' top 5 rebounders during the regular season, by averages, not by totals, Nick Claxton is first. Cool, that's fine. 9.2 per game. You would expect that. However, that top 5 is a little bit awkward. 3 of those top 5 rebounders are Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons. Now, obviously, Irving and Durant do not play for the Nets anymore, and Ben Simmons was shut down for most of the season. And the final member of that top 5, who is Raquan Gray, played 1 game all season long, which is why his average is so high. He played 1 game for the Nets. So, to recap, the top 5 rebounders for the Nets are Nick Claxton, 2 guys who aren't on the lineup anymore, 1 guy who's hurt, and 1 guy who played a single game. So other than Nick Claxton, there is no one there who can do any rebounding for them. And because of that, the Nets were 29th in the league in rebounding. They also happen to be 29th in the league in points in the paint as well. So the inside presence here for the Nets this season was basically non-existent on both ends of the floor. And that presents a little bit of a problem, because if you look at the one thing that the team did do well, it was shooting threes. It was playing from the perimeter. They finished 5th in 3-point percentage this season, but that feeds into the problem a little bit. With the team's focus seemingly being on perimeter scoring, their big men didn't really handle too much of an offensive load, so to speak. They looked to guys like Nick Claxton and Royce O'Neal, who are defensively minded and more rebounding focused, right? They don't really score a crazy amount of points unless they get opportunities off of offensive rebounds and the occasional post play being run for them, which is fine. And it works, right? Royce O'Neal and Nick Claxton held it down inside for the most part, and the Nets finished first in the league in blocks this season. But they were also 15th in the league in point paints allowed to their opponents. So Claxton and O'Neal are going out there hunting for blocked shots, fantastic, but if they're not blocking the shot, they were letting a lot of opportunities sort of slip by them defensively. So, in my opinion, the shot blocking presence is outweighed by the lack of offensive strength from guys like Claxton and O'Neal, and the unbelievable sort of lack of rebounding and defensive stops from big men whose only focus should be rebounding and defense, right? We just mentioned Royce O'Neal and Nick Claxton, they don't score a crazy amount, and they're not expected to. They're expected to lock down the paint, to play solid defense, and to secure rebounds. And while individually their numbers might be okay on that front, it's not enough to make up for the fact that the rest of the team simply can't do enough. They're not getting the defensive stops. They're giving up too many points in the paint. They're not getting the rebounds that they need. So getting guys specifically meant for rebounding and defense doesn't do you much good when you're worst in the league in rebounding and defense. Okay, maybe not worse in the league in defense. 15th is still middle of the pack, but they want to be better than that. So I'm not really sure exactly how you fix this, right? Because if you bring in another name, that's going to take time away from Claxton and O'Neal. If you trade one of them away, do you get someone back who's going to be better? Are you willing to sacrifice the defensive strength from one or both of them for someone who's more offensively focused? Do you want an offensive focused big man when you've got Mikhail Bridges and potentially Ben Simmons at your sort of 1-2 position? So it's a complicated scenario here for the Nets that they're going to have to figure out, but they need to be better inside in some manner. So yeah, we'll see what they look to do in the offseason. But that does bring us to one final point, a fourth point here for the Nets, just because I did want to sort of slip this one in here, so we'll talk about it just a bit. That question being, are Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris worth extending? Harris is due to make just under $20 million. Dinwiddie just over $20 million. So there's a little bit of money invested into those two. For Harris, you could make an argument that this is going to be his sort of first full season back after returning from his injury last year. But even with that being the case, his numbers and his minutes took a sizable hit, and it seems pretty likely that the Nets could maybe try to roll the dice, try to negotiate him down a little bit in free agency if they don't just let him go entirely. For Spencer Dinwiddie, the scoring remained pretty much the same, although his assist numbers nearly doubled, actually, compared to his first half of the season in Dallas. So if you can get Dinwiddie to commit to that role as a ball handler, as maybe more of a facilitator than a scorer, and keep those assist numbers closer to what they were in Brooklyn compared to Dallas, I say you could extend him for relatively cheap, especially if you're still unclear on the Ben Simmons situation, right? If you don't know if he's coming back or not, Dinwiddie in that ball handling role, if he's willing to take a more team focused or team oriented approach, could work quite nicely for them. So for Harris, extend if you can maybe negotiate the price down. For Dinwiddie, extend if you can get him to commit to being more of a pass first kind of guard. So we'll see if either one of those scenarios can play out here for the Nets. And I think all of that again does sort of balance on what Ben Simmons' status is going to be. So the Nets are in a really awkward spot here, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a benefit for them, but they need some things to break their way for sure. But with that in mind, that is it here for the Brooklyn Nets. So let me know what you think, what they should do here. Do you think Ben Simmons still has a contribution to make to this Nets squad? Do you think that Mikal Bridges is the guy that they build around? What do you think the answer is for some of their concerns on the inside? And what are your thoughts on Dinwiddie and Harris remaining with this team long term? Feel free to let me know. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.